Hi there, welcome back to Sunday's edition of IndyCar on, what is it today? The 24th, I think, of July. There's an awful lot of coverage today, in fact, every day at the moment, not only of the leadership election in England for the new Tory leader, but also of the enormous delays for holidaymakers who want to go to the continent for holidays. Now, the last 3 days have seen gigantic queues all the way through Kent. Not just of people travelling on holiday, of course, but the huge amount of trucks which are parked up along the side of the motorway waiting to get to Dover to take their British goods abroad to the rest of Europe. Now, the problem for the truck drivers is made a lot worse, of course, by the fact that while they're sitting on the roadside, there are no toilet facilities, there's no restrooms, there's nowhere to eat, and many of these drivers have been marooned, stranded there at the side of the road for 3 days, who I imagine have to walk enormous distances just to go to the toilet. And then we have the poor families going on holiday to Europe and trying to get across from Dover into France and Europe beyond that. And of course they're now having to wait at passport control because they voted for that. And the peculiar thing at the moment is that the British state itself, the politicians and also the British media are trying to blame the French government for the border checks which the British state insisted it wanted to return to. So all the people who are currently moaning and complaining about spending up to 24 hours in their car to go the last 2 miles to get to Dover are the very same people who actually voted for exactly that. All to get their little so-called blue British passport, which is actually black and is also printed in France, examined at the checkpoints. Now, the problem with everything to do with moving from England into Europe is caused entirely by Brexit, and despite many attempts by many different TV interviewers to get the Tory politicians to admit that the problem with Dover is largely caused by Brexit, the best they could hope to get was an acknowledgement that it was a factor, that it was in the mix, if you like. But it is a colossal no-brainer. If you vote to erect passport barriers and barriers to trade across your own country's borders, then you're going to get enormous delays, and that is exactly what you voted for. But on the other hand, we've got the sideshow of the leadership election to look forward to in September. Now, why has it got to wait till September? Boris Johnson is still sitting happily at the controls of the United Kingdom, occupying number 10 Downing Street until at least September, while the poor old British, or should I say English, Tory voters are faced with an agonising choice between a multi-billionaire on one side who's trying to present himself as Mr. Normal and Mr. Average, which he definitely isn't, and Liz Truss, who, well, let's face it, is nothing like as competent even as Rishi Sunak when it comes to speaking. Liz Truss is prone to gaffes and mistakes, and even in the local sort of photo opportunities that she was engaged in recently, you could see even primary school children rolling their eyes when she asked them questions, and one child even said, "Aren't you going to get rid of Boris Johnson? What are you going to do? Are you going to evict him?" And she said, well, he would have to move out if she became Prime Minister. But even the children on the streets know that this is a Hobson's choice between a no-hoper and, well, Rishi Sunak, who, let's face it, is nothing like a normal working man in the UK. He is basically a banker. He is a man who wants to, well, basically he says he wants to lower taxes, but then says that he can't lower taxes. So he's probably going to raise taxes. He's going to make cuts. He's going to introduce even more austerity in order to allegedly balance the books, because he says that his credit card as the UK Chancellor is maxed out, even though the British state doesn't work that way. So there's just really nothing to choose from here. This is basically scraping the bottom of the barrel. There were some interviews filmed in Scotland, in fact in Glasgow, just recently. Typical Vox Pops interviews where the interviewer was looking, I think it was an STV interviewer in this case, picked members of the public at random. Just so happened to pick an English lady who was obviously living in Scotland, and asked her opinion. She said that she didn't want any of them, and she thought that the Tories were basically destroying the country. And then we had a few more Scots who were basically laughing and saying there's no way they'd vote for any of them, and they didn't vote Tory anyway. And finally they found one single Tory voter who basically said that Boris Johnson was a buffoon. He was glad to get rid of him. And I think he was more or less saying that he would vote for Sunak because there wasn't really any other choice. Even so, that you can sense the level of desperation in even the Tory voters at the moment, with Liz Truss appearing to have some kind of a lead in opinion polls, despite the fact that she's very obviously not that competent. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, what is going on in the minds of the Tory voters of the southeast of England, in the leafy suburbs, the retirement villages and so on. What on earth are they thinking? Because many of them are saying that they're actually going to vote for Boris Johnson in the election, even though it would mean spoiling their ballot. Many of them might abstain because they don't like the choice and would like Boris to stay. Who knows? The clown show just goes on and on. Back in Scotland, we are no further forward, of course, than we were before. And anybody looking at the British press this morning, I'm talking about British newspapers that are sold in Scotland with a Scottish badge on the top saying that they're Scottish, are all moaning about either the Scottish Health Service or they're attacking Scottish sport in some way. But basically, looking down the various reports this morning, particularly from the BBC, you'll see no good in Scotland happening at all. They focus very heavily on racism within Scottish cricket. They focused very heavily on racism in the para bowling team, where a man has been apparently suspended from the bowling team because of a comment he made about Rishi Sunak, and I think Hamza Yusuf as well, I may be wrong. And then we had the attacks on the Scottish hospital system, claiming that there was only one nurse on duty on each ward in the Queen Elizabeth hospital. Now, you would expect there to be one nurse on duty in each ward in any hospital at any time, because that would be the minimum that you would require to keep an eye on all the patients on that ward. Is that so unusual? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the attacks on the Scottish system, health system, go on and on and on. And nothing in the British media this week in Scotland painted a pleasant picture of the country that we live in. No surprise there, I suppose. However, on the upside, we still know that when Scotland votes for independence, that the Scottish state pension is going to rise. In fact, it's going to rise by a substantial amount, up to £225 more per week, making the Scottish pension over £350 a week for individuals. And this, incidentally, puts us on a par with the median amount of pension paid across Europe. Now, that is not the highest pension in Europe, that is just an average. But it just goes to show you how far behind the rest of the world Scotland is as a part of the UK when it comes to pensions. Imagine that you are a pensioner and you're faced with voting either for more austerity cuts and a low pension under the Tories, or voting for independence and knowing that your pension is almost going to double as a result. I know which one I would choose. In the meantime, as you probably know, at the end of this coming week, on the 29th of July, there is the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group's conference happening in Dunfermline, which I'll be speaking on the Friday. Now, I've mentioned already in the previous broadcast the fact that the Scottish state has an opportunity to leave the Union via a different method from a referendum. We expect that the Supreme Court, which is meant to be ruling on the issue of whether we can have a referendum without a Section 30 order, will probably, and I'm not laying bets on this, but my guess is that it will probably rule that Scotland cannot have an independence referendum which is organised by the Scottish Parliament, for the very, very simple reason that the Scottish Parliament is a British arm of Parliament. It is not in any way free to do what it wishes, simply because it was created by the British state with specific controls on what powers it had in order to prevent us from voting for independence. And that leaves only the general election whenever that happens. Now, there is talk at the moment that there could be a general election before the end of this year, simply because of the mess the country is becoming because of Tory policies and the huge uncertainty is caused by the Conservative Party's leadership change in the middle of a crisis. So whoever actually ends up being elected to be the leader of the Tory party, and whoever then occupies number 10 Downing Street, has to then try to win back the confidence of the United Kingdom. And there's a very good chance, I think, that there will be a general election, because if Liz Truss manages, against all the odds, incidentally, to win this. Now, it's very strange that the British press now has her as a favourite to win against Sunak. Could it be that this is just to throw us all off the scent? Or is there something else going on in the background? Is Truss actually being groomed, as it were, by the Tory party to take over from Boris as a more, what's the word I'm looking for? A softer and more serious Prime Minister, one who is not as stridently Brexity, and perhaps one who is a little bit more, someone who's a little bit more enthusiastic about maybe doing things slightly differently when it comes to things like border controls. Remember that the border controls that are at the English side of the English Channel, God knows, why is it not called the French Channel? Maybe it's called the French Channel on the other side. Anyway, either way, there have to be French border control checks on this side because of an agreement between the two governments, and there are British border control checks on the French side. This is to ensure that people passing from one side of the channel to the other get off the ferry quickly and away so that the ferry can keep to its timetable. Obviously not really working very well, and of course the British state is claiming that that's because there aren't enough French border checkers to do the weave through as people present their passports. But honestly, I don't think it's anything to do with that. I think it's just simply to do with the fact that there are border checks. It slows everything down completely, and it means that the ferries can't keep to the timetables. Who could, when there are queues 25 miles long all the way into a small town? So Britain is in a terrible state, and if it stays in a terrible state, and I don't predict that it's going to get much better in the coming months, there could be a general election. Maybe the Tories are getting fed up being in power, realise that they've screwed the country over so badly that it cannot be recovered, and decide to basically abrogate responsibility to the Labour Party. Let them win the general election, let Keir Starmer hold the baby after after the voters have thrown the Tories out. Who knows? This has happened before. Remember, the Tories have wrecked the country before now, ended up papped out on the rear, only to get, well, in the last instance, New Labour, which was basically old Tory, but with a red badge. So it could be that we're in for a general election. Anyway, if there is a general election and it's the only way we can vote to leave the Union, then that's what we have to do. Whether the word de facto referendum is used to describe this, or whether it's called a plebiscite election, is largely immaterial. But what is important, I think, and I think this is the way that it's going to go, is that we will need to vote for independence by electing all of the MPs, all 59 of them, from pro-independence parties, with, we hope, more than 50% of the vote in Scotland, in order to prove that we have the support for independence. When that's inevitably rejected by the British state, the British media, and all the British politicians who will say that it's not the place of a referendum to hold, not the place of a general election to have a referendum on the Constitution, that leaves us with only one more option, and that is to completely abolish the Holyrood Parliament under devolution and re-establish it as an independent Scottish only body which can take decisions of this magnitude. Because when you get to the stage where all the doors have been shut in your face by the ruling force in the other country, you don't have any other choice. So I would anticipate that if there's a general election, and if we get all of these MPs, and if we get 50% of the popular vote plus one, then we have basically won the right to abolish devolution forever and reinstate full Scottish statehood with our own parliament under our own laws, which I outlined the other day. And when we do that, we also know that the European Free Trade Association will welcome us straight in, which means, going back to border controls, that we don't need any border controls because we will have a free trade agreement not only with the European Union, but also with England, or the rest of the UK, as they would like to call it. So there won't be any border checks at the Scottish border. There won't even be any checks on goods flowing in and out because we won't need them. And that means Scotland gets off on the correct foot, as it were, being able to trade with Europe, unlike England, without passport control and without checks, but also being able to trade everywhere else as well. And to me, this is a win-win situation for everybody, including the pensioners, whose pensions are going to go up. And I can't see the downside to this at all. Okay, it means great big upheavals. But on the other hand, we know that we have a parliament already in place. We know that we have politicians who are capable of doing this. And we know that it would be the last act, if you like, of the Union to tell us that we can't use the general election to vote for independence. But it would be the last act because that is the last chapter in this sorry saga. I don't think that we should invoke the claim of right before we have demonstrated that there is enough support for independence to have a majority in any vote, whatever vote that is, whether it's a referendum, which we have ourselves, or whether we just simply say we demonstrated it in the general election, and therefore we are going to invoke our own constitutional rules, reconfigure our parliament, kick out all the unionist politicians and make their parties illegal in Scotland, and simply leave, because that's what it boils down to. And one day soon we will be doing it. If not this year, then certainly next year. And that means, as I've said before, the clock is ticking for the British Union, in other words, the union between England and Scotland. And it means that there is nothing and there is no one in England who can do anything about it. You will hear constantly in the media at the moment people from Nigel Farage down the way telling you that it was a once-in-a-generation vote and you're not allowed to have another one because, well, it's not been a generation. Whatever a generation is, who knows? It could be dog years, it could be a generation of political governments, which is about 5 years, but nobody has defined what this lifetime generation thing is, and it's all basically just hearsay anyway. So that's where we're at the moment, and I think we can all, buy the popcorn and sit back and watch British holidaymakers in their queues, sweltering for days on end trying to get out of their own country. Well, it's actually easier for people in rubber dinghies coming from France to get into England than it is for people to fly back from holiday, because the British Border Control Agency has said that they simply do not have enough manpower nor enough facilities to process the large number of migrants who are trying to enter the UK illegally via rubber dinghies and boats across the Channel. So it seems that Brexit is a very effective means of preventing British people from going on holiday and returning, but it's absolutely crap at preventing anybody from illegally migrating into the UK. It's had exactly the opposite effect from what was intended. And therefore, I don't think we will see Brexit making Britain better. I don't see Liz Truss's promises of putting British apples back at the top of the tree, or undermining British farmers, or making sure that our cheeses go abroad, or that our Melton Mowbray pork pies are the top of the Paris cuisine scene over in Paris. I don't think any of that is going to happen. The only sunlit uplands there are the baking hot streets going through Kent towards Dover, where everybody is sitting sweltering with no toilet facilities and no way of getting on holiday other than to sit there and crawl forwards at a couple of miles every couple of hours to get to the port where they can actually leave their own country and go on holiday. Anyway, that's about it from me, but I think we can say that Brexit is an unmitigated disaster, and despite the fact the politicians keep denying that Brexit is the problem, Brexit is the problem, and Brexit has always been the problem, and as long as Brexit continues, it will continue to be a problem. not least of which is going to be a problem in Northern Ireland when the British government basically tears up the Northern Ireland Protocol, which it agreed to with the European Union, and tried to reinstate some kind of border control in Ireland, because basically whatever they do in Northern Ireland, they are going to have to put in some kind of border control on the island of Ireland, which is going to cause panic, and it's going to make the lives of millions of people in the north and the south of Ireland much less safe, and it's going to risk the reigniting of old violent uprisings, which we thought we'd seen the last of when the Northern Ireland peace process finally finished. And since then, the people of Northern Ireland have flourished. And actually, under the protocol, Northern Ireland has the highest growth rate in the United Kingdom other than in Scotland. So what will this protocol rewrite do? And is it legal? Well, the British state is saying that it doesn't break international law. The rest of the world says, yes, it does. So again, I can't see how the British government is going to square the Brexit circle. Everything that was predicted that would happen with Brexit is happening. Everything that was promised to us if we voted no last time has not happened, has been reneged on. All the promises were welched on. None of the vaunted powers and the invitations to lead instead of just being a part of the UK, all lies. So I don't think anyone in Scotland really trusts the Tories at all anymore, and I can't blame them in any way. And I think STV's Vox Pop's interview the other day of random people in Glasgow just goes to show that even the lone Tory in that group of individuals they interviewed was not happy at the Conservative Party. Anyway, that's where the United Kingdom is at the moment. It's not a happy place. It's a place where you can't escape because you voted to put up barriers to your own holidays. And it's a place where you can't get goods in or out properly. And prices are rising. Prices are going to keep rising. So for me, it's a no-brainer. We vote for independence either in a general election or a referendum, and then we actually dissolve our own parliament and reinstate it as a full Scottish parliament, a bit like a full Scottish breakfast, and get rid of all the unionist parties from Scotland and make them illegal, because they would be. Once the Scottish Parliament is a Scottish Parliament and is no longer devolved, we have the right to make such parties illegal, because they would be foreign parties registered in another country, and under our own rules we would be perfectly within our rights to do that. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. In the meantime, as I've always said, keep the faith and just keep stocked up on popcorn and watch the chaos unfold as Brexit continues to trash the United Kingdom. I'll see you soon. Bye bye for now.